break down my 5 players that are set to go absolutely nuclear here in week 8 of the fantasy season. These are the players with immense upside, amazing matchups, and the players that you want to make sure you start if you want to absolutely dominate your league mates here in week 8 of the fantasy season. All right, let's kick the video off with DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears, who's coming off of back-to-back great fantasy performances with 20 or more fantasy points in 2 straight games and a touchdown in each of the last 2 games. But I think more importantly, he's averaged at least 6.5 yards per carry in each of the last 2 games. And we saw through the first couple of weeks of the season a much lower overall yards per carry for DeAndre Swift. He was at 3.1 yards per carry in 3 out of the first 4 games, but he kind of kept his fantasy value alive for the most part due to the passing game. At least 3 receptions in each of the first 4 games, where in the last 2 games he's had 2 or less receptions, right? But he is getting it done on the ground, and that's with Kyle Monangai also getting touches in this backfield. But Ben Johnson, since the bye week, has shown that the Bears want to run the football first and foremost, and they have done that with a lot of success in the last 2 weeks. And still, overall, DeAndre Swift on the season has been solid, averaging 16.1 fantasy points per game. He is the RB12 in full PPR, the RB14 in half PPR. So ultimately, is still coming in as a very solid start on a weekly basis. But you gotta love this matchup here in week 8 on the season, even on the road here, gets the Baltimore Ravens, who have given up the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs so far on the season. So he's in a great spot. Even if Monangai continues to get touches in this backfield, I'm not worried about it for DeAndre Swift. This Ravens defense, they are going to start to get healthier at some point, but they still have a lot of injuries. And even when they were healthy very early in the season, they were still awful against the run. So this is a great spot for DeAndre Swift. And keep in mind, he's got 2 really good matchups coming up after this week as he gets the Cincinnati Bengals and the New York Giants. So DeAndre Swift is going to be a sit and forget for the next couple of weeks. But here in week 8, due to this matchup, I think he'd go absolutely nuclear. He has to be in your starting lineups. Except let's take a look at J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos, coming off of 2 pretty awful fantasy performances. 9 fantasy points in week 7, was pretty effective on the ground. 14 touches for 81 yards, 5.7 yards per carry. Had a catch that went for negative yardage. Then in week 6 against the Jets, I mean, everybody was bad in that game, right? But he had just 4 fantasy points. If we look through the first 5 weeks of the season, J.K. Dobbins had 11.5 or more fantasy points in every game and had scored a touchdown in 4 of the first 5 games of the season. So far on the year, RB17 in full PPR, RB15 and half PPR. So he's still been solid, but kind of similar to DeAndre Swift, where like we haven't got a ton of huge like spike weeks or anything necessarily. We're just kind of looking like at an average floor for most weeks. But I think J.K. Dobbins is going to be very effective in this week 8 matchup at home against the Dallas Cowboys, a bottom 5 unit in terms of fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So you got to feel good here. And at worst, the floor is very, very safe here. 12.2 fantasy points per game on average for J.K. Dobbins. And ultimately, over the last 2 weeks, when we look at the Broncos, they have been in kind of these strange game scripts. Like, I don't even know what week 6 was. It was just an overall mess, right? But then we look to this past week, like the Broncos were in a position where they needed to throw the football for a majority of the game. And when Dobbins still got the football, he was still effective. We just kind of saw that sort of design play towards the end of the game that went, for a touchdown pass to RJ Harvey. But Harvey is still getting hardly any involvement, 4 or less touches on the ground in the last 3 games. He gets a little bit of involvement in the receiving game, but it doesn't hurt Dobbins' value overall. And this is going to be a high-scoring game, in my opinion. I know that the Broncos defense is one of the best defenses in the league, but just due to the nature of how the Dallas Cowboys play football right now, where they're just constantly throwing the football, trying to put up points, I think they're going to stay in this game. And I think that the Broncos offense is going to move with ease against one of the very worst defenses overall in the league. So I love Dobbins this week. I do like Courtland Sutton. We're not going to talk about him in today's video, but by the way, I do really like Courtland Sutton this week as well. I think the Broncos offense in a great spot here in week 8, and J.K. Dobbins should absolutely smash. I feel so good about J.K. Dobbins this week that I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on J.K. Dobbins to score a rushing touchdown here in week 8 of the season. Ultimately, the Cowboys have given up 5 total rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns to running backs, so this is a great spot for Dobbins. And don't forget, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH are getting a free NFL Pick 'em to use towards Week 8 NFL action. Take that free pick 'em. Take Dobbins to score a touchdown. If both of those lines hit, you'll automatically double your cash entry. And on top of that, as soon as you play through $5 on Underdog, as long as you sign up using promo code THECATCH, they're going to give you $50 in bonus cash. And on top of that, they're also going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up using that promo code down below, THECATCH. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH if you want to take advantage of all of their Week 8 NFL offers. Let's talk about Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs, who got his first start of the season in Week 7 this past week, and the Chiefs wasted no time getting him involved. 23.2 fantasy points, 10 targets, 7 catches, 2 total touchdowns. Big week against the Raiders. We all knew this was a great matchup, but we didn't exactly know how the snaps were going to look for Rashee Rice, and ultimately, he was only on the field for 41% of snaps, but he scored early. The Chiefs were up on the Raiders very early in this game, blew them out. I mean, this just wasn't a game script where, the Chiefs needed to throw the football. And I don't particularly know here in Week 8 how things are going to look on Monday Night Football in terms of a game script, especially if Jaden Daniels is not able to play for the Commanders. But once again, I think early in this game, the Chiefs will be throwing the football, and it's a very good overall matchup for Rashee Rice, as the Washington Commanders are right now bottom 10 in terms of fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. So we look to kind of the target share overall last week. We had 10 targets, like I said, to Rashee Rice. Xavier Worthy garnered 4 total targets. Hollywood Brown did get some involvement. He scored that touchdown. He does have 4 touchdowns since week 4 of the season, but just 4 total targets for Hollywood Brown this past week. But worth noting that he does get that kind of red zone involvement in those looks. Juju Smith-Schuster had 3 targets this past week, and then Travis Kelce 3 targets as well. And if you're wondering, Tyquan Thornton 2 targets. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the majority of the passing volume is going to Rashee Rice if we're basing things off of his first start, and I just don't think that's going to change here in Week 8 of the season. So whether we're looking at a game script here where the Chiefs are scoring early, getting up on the Commanders, and Marcus Mariota is not really able to get back into the swing of things in terms of this game script, I think that's okay. And if we get a competitive game script, whether it's Mariota at quarterback maybe surprising us, or it's Jaden Daniels who is able to start, both situations are good for Rashee Rice, and he is set for another massive game, coming off of a massive game. So I think he absolutely needs to be in your guys' starting lineups. He could go nuclear here in Week 8. Except I want to talk about A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, coming off of his best fantasy performance of the season, 28.1 fantasy points in Week 7, 6 targets, 4 catches, 121 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. This was just the second game on the season where A.J. Brown has scored a touchdown. Now, we're not that far removed from the last time this season the Eagles and Giants played. That was in Week 6. A.J. Brown was solid, 9 targets, 6 catches, 80 receiving yards, 14 total fantasy points. So I think a couple things here, right? We've only seen A.J. Brown score double-digit fantasy points 3 times on the season. He's currently the wide receiver 25 in full PPR, the wide receiver 22 and half PPR, and I get enough questions about A.J. Brown that I don't think he's just like a set and forget for a lot of you guys out there. Maybe with the biocalypse this week, you guys are going to think twice about A.J. Brown, but I still think there's some uncertainty around the Eagles offense and A.J. Brown, and it honestly reminds me a lot of last year, except it's kind of the opposite. Last year, people were panicking, I think, more on the wide receivers than A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, obviously less on Saquon Barkley, and then people were still panicking on Jalen Hurts, and I'm still getting a ton of questions about Jalen Hurts. The Saquon Barkley questions are understandable, and I guess the wide receiver questions are understandable here as well, especially with Dallas Goedert, who's seen a lot of involvement at the tight end position, but really, I think all these Eagles players have to remain must-start players, and this is a great spot for the Eagles offense here in week 8. This Giants defense, they are able to get after the quarterback at times, make some plays. I get that they played well in week 6, but ultimately, I think this is just a good spot for the Eagles offense at home. Feels like this Eagles team right now is still like just pissed off on a weekly basis, and I think they're going to come out here, have a big offensive day, and really try and remind the league of how good this team is overall. And, I think they're going to try and get some revenge here for that week 6 loss on the road against the Giants and try and prove that they are the dominant team in the NFC East. So I like the Eagles offensive starters a lot in this matchup. It's a great spot for A.J. Brown. The Giants are one of the worst teams overall in terms of fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. So I think he continues this streak of solid games, and just bear in mind, he has had 6 or more targets in every game this year except for week 1. 8 or more targets in every game of the season except for 2 games on the year. That was this past week and week 1 against Dallas. So he is still heavily involved in this offense. He is a player who needs to be in your starting lineup no matter what here in week 8. All right, last but not least, I want to talk about Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. I think this is a great spot for Kamara, who's coming off of a game where he had just 5.9 fantasy points in what was honestly a pretty good matchup this past week against the Chicago Bears, but just 28 yards on the ground, 3 targets, 3 catches, went for 1 total yard. So not a lot here. We look on the season so far, Kamara is the RB22 in full PPR, the RB31 in half PPR. He's only scored double digits in 4 out of 7 games on the year with a ceiling of 16 fantasy points. So like the floor has been okay, but it's been a bit inconsistent. The ceiling hasn't been crazy high. He's only scored 1 touchdown on the year as well. And he's coming off of his worst fantasy performance of the season. But ultimately, I like this spot. I know a lot of people look at this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense and they get worried, like this is a bad matchup, Vita Vea, and the Bucs are very good against stopping the run. That is true. They've given up 549 total rushing yards on the season, 6 rushing touchdowns. So nothing bad there. But then I want you guys to take a little bit of a closer look. In terms of actual receiving yardage to running backs, they have given up the most total receiving yards. Again, 431 total receiving yards. So that is the worst amongst any team in the league. And it's not just the worst, it is the worst by far. The next highest team is the Bengals with 310 total receiving yards allowed. So that's over 100 yards more than the worst team, and we're comparing them to the Cincinnati Bengals defense. So yeah, they're good against stopping the run, but they are not good against receiving running backs. And Kamara on the season has had 5 or more targets in 4 out of 7 games. So he is still a running back that gets that involvement in the receiving game. And now we know that Kendre Miller is set to miss the entirety of the season. We'll see how Devin Neal, the rookie running back, gets in the mix here and everything. But I think that Kamara is a lock for multiple targets overall and is in position to have a really solid game when we look at this matchup, because ultimately, I know the Bucs, it was not their week last week, no matter what they tried to do, but I do believe that this is a game where the Bucs are going to come out, play well, and the Saints are going to be in position where they need to throw the football. And once again, there's only so many offensive weapons on this offense. I mean, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, perfectly fine wide receiver room, and I guess a decent tight end room with Jawan Johnson and the ghost of Taysom Hill still floating around. But Alvin Kamara is a vocal point of this offense, and he is in position in this matchup to get a lot of receiving work. I think he could absolutely come through for you guys. Don't be too disheartened by week 7. I think ultimately this could be one of Kamara's best overall fantasy days here in week 8 of the season. There you guys have it. There are my 5 players set to go absolutely nuclear here in week 8 of the fantasy season. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions as I can in the comment section down below. So make sure you guys drop your fantasy questions. I'll answer as many as I can throughout the week, whatever you guys need as we approach week 8 with a lot of bye weeks. And while you guys are down there, does me a huge favor. It helps out the channel tremendously if you guys hit that like button and that subscribe button on the way out. When the videos and playlists pop up on the screen, we're going to have everything that you guys could possibly need to dominate this week and every coming week of the fantasy season. So make sure you guys check out all the videos while they drop. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.